Well, last night at Madison Square Garden, the American Nazi, and I say that because that is what comes out of his mouth now. He is as much of an American Nazi as his Jewish Nazi buddy Stephen Miller is, his Christian Nazi buddy when he gets out of prison, Steve Bannon is. Trump anchored his bid to get the presidency again on the kind of anti-migrant fear that was so reminiscent of what happened 85 years ago in the same venue. And he doubled down, this orange fucker doubled down on his promise for what he continues to call a massive deportation program on day one to reverse the immigrant invasion, end quote. His own filthy fucking parents were immigrants. His old lady is an immigrant. But that doesn't matter. There's some evidence that Hitler's matrilineal ancestry was Jewish. It doesn't matter to these people once they become absorbed by this putrid hatred that just eats them alive and that they vomit out on anyone who will listen and people who don't want to hear it. That's when it takes over. That's when it doesn't matter if Trump has a daughter and grandchildren and a son-in-law who are Jews. He doesn't give a fuck. He would throw them into the nearest goddamn pit and cover them with lime given the chance if it meant it advanced his agenda. Trump is a sick son of a bitch, all the way down to the soles of his feet. Now, the people who got up there on the stage last night, and some of them were just fucking outrageous. This little prick named Tony Hinchcliffe, who bills himself as a comedian, he's another one of these sick bastards. He's the one that called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. And former congressional candidate David Rem called Kamala Harris the Antichrist. He called her that? And he called her the devil? This sounds like Father Coughlin, the Nazi Catholic fuckhead who was on the radio in this country back in the 30s preaching anti-Semitic hatred. And Trump said that the United States is an occupied country? Wow. And the language that was used last night by these surrogates of Trump, these American Nazis who stood up on the stage. You know, when I listened to some of the video after the event was over, because I missed it, I didn't get home till late. I got part of the this horror until I had to turn it off. But I heard them using the worst goddamn language I've ever heard at a political rally, which may speak to my naivete, but I don't think so. Well, if nothing else, what happened last night made it very clear to voters, citizens, Americans, of what we're facing 8 days from now. Kamala Harris was promising Americans that we can move on from this sick, degenerate behavior of the orange bastard and his crew, while Trump was out there preaching this kind of violence and hatred. He stood out there and said he would take care of everybody. He would protect everybody. Can you imagine this rotten son of... He never would, but can you imagine what this fucker would do with a second term? And at that rally, when this filthy little piglet, Tony Hinchcliffe, have you ever heard of him? I've never heard of him. What is he, a comedian? He bills himself as a comedian? And he said this, quote, I don't know if you know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. It's called Puerto Rico. I would suggest, that's the end of the quote, I would suggest that any so-called Latino in this country, Hispanic, whatever you want to identify yourself as, after hearing this and knowing that this came right out of Trump's mouth, these speakers at this rally by the Orange Bastard would not have said anything that wasn't fully understood was going to be said by Trump. Trump may not have vetted every single sentence that came out of these pig bastards' mouths, but he knew exactly the direction they were going to go, and he encouraged them to get as nasty and as violent as they could. Garbage, an island of garbage in the middle of the ocean. If you are Latino, if you're Hispanic, what are you going to do about this? Are you still going to say, well, you know, I kind of support Trump because I liked his economy? Oh, come the fuck on. And if you have an Hispanic name, you're running a risk if this son of a bitch gets elected. You're running the risk of a knock on your door in the middle of the night where somebody wants to see your citizenship papers because your name is Gomez or Hernandez or Sanchez or whatever that even sounds Hispanic to this orange Nazi. Do you not understand that? And the comments got the usual reaction you'd expect from the crowd. You know, people were clapping, applauding this. I wonder how many people in that audience, this was in Midtown Manhattan, Madison Square. There are more Puerto Ricans in New York City than there are in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I wonder how many of those people were sitting there supporting this white Nazi while he said these things about them. And what did they do, these Puerto Ricans who were in that audience? Because I know they were. I know there were some. What did they do? In response to a report from The Hill website on the comments that were being made, especially by this Hinchcliffe little fucker, Senator Rick Scott of Florida, where there is a huge Latino population, he said in a post on X that, quote, "It's not funny and it's not true. Puerto Ricans are amazing people and amazing Americans. I've been to the island many times. It's a beautiful place. Everyone should visit. I will always do whatever I can to help any Puerto Rican in Florida or on the island," end quote. Which hit my gag reflex. You white, skull-faced looking fucker, you. Rick Scott, you look like a goddamn ghost. I swear, this tall, bony white man. Every time I see him, I mean, the least he could do for public appearance, put a goddamn hairpiece on. Because your head, Rick, your head looks like a death skull. Oh. Plus, Rick Scott was the head of a so-called health insurance company that perpetrated the largest fraud in the history of that kind of fraud against people of the United States. He took their money. He raped them financially. And his company did not provide the service that they promised. And the company was charged, not Rick Scott. Jesus Christ. And according to a statement from the Orange Bastards campaign's senior advisor, a woman named Danielle Alvarez, she said, Mr. Hinchcliffe's jokes do not reflect the views of President Trump or the campaign. Oh, shut the fuck up, Danielle. You have sold your soul to this white monster. And how could you, Danielle Alvarez, retain even a shred of self-respect with a family name like Alvarez? Oh, well. Oh, well. In response to this little fucker Hinchcliffe's appearance at the rally. Representative Carlos Jimenez, it's spelled with a G, not a J, Jimenez, a Republican in Florida. He said in a post on X that, quote, Puerto Rico is the crown jewel of the Caribbean and home to many of the most patriotic Americans I know. End quote. And you know something else? I don't know if you knew this, but a very good source told me that Puerto Rico per capita has more Medal of Honor winners than any other group of Americans. Puerto Ricans, who are Americans, of course, Puerto Ricans have a higher per capita percentage of Medal of Honor winners, combat, than any other subdivision of American citizens. But to Tony Hinchcliffe and the orange Nazi fuck Donald Trump, well, Puerto Ricans, they live on a garbage dump in the middle of the ocean. Ocean? Really, Tony? You ignorant slob, you? You think that's an ocean? Okay. Representative Anthony Desposito, a Republican in New York, who's facing a tough race to keep his House seat. He said in a post on Sunday, quote, my mom was born and raised in Puerto Rico. It's a beautiful island with a rich culture and an integral part of the USA. The only thing that's garbage was a bad comedy set. Stay on message, end quote. What a fucking milquetoasty little chicken shit thing to say. Hey, yo, Representative, your last name? Desposito? I think that's Hispanic. And yet you support, you still are part of a party, the Republican Party, that is now a solely owned faction of the sick fucking mind of Donald Trump and his anti-Latino, anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, anti-every fucking thing except white males like him. You're part of that group, Tony? May I call you Tony? No? Okay. Representative Desposito? Really? Your mom was born and raised in Puerto Rico. Well, he's calling your mother someone who came from an island of garbage. And you're going to say, the only thing that's garbage was a bad comedy set? Stay on message. Oh, my God. And then, of course, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said on X, quote, it is wild that a vice presidential candidate would take time out of his busy schedule to analyze a joke taken out of context to make it seem racist. Oh, wait a minute, I got that wrong. Oh, Hinchcliffe said that because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, and Tim Walz criticized the comments that this fucked up Hinchett made about Puerto Rico. So Hinchcliffe, fuck him, Hinchcliffe, who cares? He said on X Sunday that, quote, it is wild that a vice presidential candidate would take time out of his busy schedule to analyze a joke taken out of context to make it seem racist. Can you believe that? Taken out of context, you little fucker. Nothing was taken out of context, Hinchett. And then to say that to make it seem racist? Well, Mr. Hinchcliffe, I don't know. Go fuck yourself. You are such a temporary blip, a little shit stain on history. You had your moment. You got to stand before the largest audience you'll ever stand before to spew your racist horse shit, and look what came out of your mouth. And then Hinchcliffe added in his post, get this, I love Puerto Rico and I vacation there. I made fun of everyone. Watch the whole set. I'm a comedian. It might be time, Tim, to change your tampon. End quote. People like Hinchett here or Hinchcliffe, whatever the fuck his name is, can't open his mouth without bats and vermin flying out. But this is the kind of people Trump worships, well, they worship him, but this is the kind of people that he surrounds himself with. People who use the F word at a political rally. And some of those people there, Dr. Phil? Dr. Phil? Well, yes, Mike. Good old Dr. Phil. There he was. And Trump, when the Orange Bastard, he was there for what, 2 hours? He was talking about the phallic comparison of Elon Musk's rockets. The other night he was talking about what's his name, the golfer's penis. Now he's talking about Elon Musk's phallic-like rocket. And he talked about Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, who had the, quote, little beautiful face with those glasses. And then Kennedy Jr. spoke there. And Trump said, quote, I'm going to let him go wild on health. I'm going to let him go wild on the food. Trump is telling us what he's going to do. Unless, as Millie Ben David said, my sponsor tonight, go vote and take someone with you. But all of the conversation, most of the conversation, once the orange Nazi got the stage, that came out of his pie hole was about himself. Because the thousands of people in the audience existed above all as an adoring mirror. And as Frank Bruni pointed out, just like Narcissus, the Greek god who fell in love with his own reflection, Trump couldn't get enough of his reflection. Every time it looked like he might be winding down with his bullshit, he took another long look. And Bruni says his listeners' strained patience couldn't compete with his unrestrained self-love. He luxuriated in it for nearly 80 minutes of boastful and baffling remarks. And it wasn't just that. Trump wanted the iconography of Madison Square Garden, a symbol of triumph for any entertainer who can fill it, right? But there he was. He wanted to tell New York City that it could never be rid of him. And as Bruni puts it, quote, he wanted a measure of affirmation beyond anything he got in Milwaukee at the RNC in July, beyond anything he can get in any of those battleground states. Sunday's rally, Sunday's orgy was born not of political calculus, but out of personal need. Yeah. He mentioned the overflow crowd on the streets outside. He said, quote, they're outside watching this now at levels that nobody has ever seen before, end quote, when the truth was outside were thousands upon thousands of counter-protesters who were there to tell him to get the fuck out of New York City for good. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.